Take a look at the past. When Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2008, only 1% of the money was returned to investors. Lehman was supposedly leveraged 100 to 1 by the time it collapsed because the value of the assets had dropped so much. A short market downturn destroyed their measly 3% in reserves, and there wasn't anything left. However, during this time, many of the banks that caused that to happen received trillions in bailouts, while the American public suffered because they trusted their leaders. Side note, we should consider that most Congress creatures, because they aren't people, increased their net worths between 20 to 40% on average during the 2008 collapse. They should all be in jail for that alone. But I continue. The problem the banks are currently having has to do with the repo markets, which spiked in October 2019. Coincidentally, at the same time the reported virus was released, and this was honestly a big red flag for me. However, there was a time this past October when the repo rate spiked to over 10% from a standard of 1 to 1.5%. Well, what does this mean? Well, considering it was Lehman Brothers who started the crash in 2008 by borrowing money in the repo market from the Fed, aka the Federal Reserve. The Fed, by the way, is about as federally owned as Federal Express, aka FedEx. The Fed is a privately owned banking cartel that is supposed to watch over and stabilize the markets. Instead, they seem to manufacture crashes, but I'll save that for another article. The repo markets are for banks who have extra cash at the end of the day to lend to banks who need extra cash at the end of the day. This is to maintain those reserve requirements that I was just discussing. So if banks are required to keep 3.3% in reserves, then sometimes they must borrow money to maintain those reserves. Special note, reserve requirements are now currently 0%. Yikes. However, returning to the past, if a bank doesn't seem reliable, then banks won't want to lend to the risky banks. Hence why the rate spiked to 10% in October. Unlike 2008, we are seeing the problem being papered over literally. When Lehman had to borrow from the Fed in 2008, all hell broke loose, and we saw the orchestrated 2008 collapse. Now, 11 years later in 2019, we had the same event happen, but no real action from the markets. The markets even posted all-time highs shortly after this event. This was signaling that everything is awesome, nothing to see here. This Fed intervention has been a stealth bailout. Instead of identifying the weak banks that caused the interest rates in the repo markets to spike to over 10%, the Fed stepped in to offer all banks assistance. They also made sure not to disclose the banks that were at risk, as to prevent any bank runs on the risky banks. The Fed proceeded to provide nearly $75 to $100 billion a day to banks as they quietly went through the crisis, which still has not ended. Technically, they reduced reserve requirements to 0%, which means banks can leverage money indefinitely, which is both wrong and further destroying the economy, assuming that they haven't already gone too far. When we look back at the results of the 2008 collapse, we start to understand that the 2008 collapse did something significant to the banking industry when we saw the merging of major banks and investment banks. The mergers were done to keep the cash reserves up in the banking industry. Bank of America swallowed Merrill Lynch, and now we have JP Morgan Chase. I distinctly remember the banks offering to move people's money to mutual funds or bond funds after that time, and I believe they got in trouble for this. But you would have to look that up for yourself. This means that banks were transferring assets from a 9 to 1 debt creation system to a 32 to 1 debt derivative investment system. We should truly be frightened when we start to understand that the Fed was providing assets to banks to keep potentially 32 times leveraging afloat with $75 billion a day. Now let's do the math on that. 75 billion times 32 equals $2.4 trillion. Yes, that number is $2.4 trillion. That is assuming a worst case scenario, but it means that they have potentially around $2.4 trillion in bad investments that could be bringing down the ship. I believe this is where it starts to get very interesting, and I want you to start putting more numbers in perspective. You may want to reread this paper after I explain these facts. If you took $1 trillion and spent $1 million a day since the day Jesus was born, you would only spend about 3/4 of that amount of money. Now take the estimates of the derivative market, which is sadly unknown, but still to be reported to be between $750 trillion and $2.4 quadrillion. Yes, you read that right. The estimates range by over $1,000 trillion, which is a crime in itself. But let's put that in perspective. If you had $1 quadrillion, which is $1,000 trillion, you could literally spend $1 billion a day with 9 zeros for 2,000 years and still not spend the full amount. This is how much fake money the Federal Reserve and central banking system has created since 1971, when we went off the gold standard. Now, with the understanding that the banks have potentially $2.4 trillion in bad assets, does the $2.2 trillion coronavirus bailout seem a bit too exact? They're even asking for $2.7 trillion for a full corporate bailout, which is closer to covering my $2.4 trillion estimates. It frustrates me that the bailout is going to the people who've created this problem in the first place. And the manufactured problems always seem to be naturally creating the solution, a solution that everyone seems to think is helping them. Remember the Patriot Act if you honestly believe that good measures come out of tragedy. That was simply manufactured terror for the purpose of stealing basic human rights, and they won 20 years ago. However, the powers that were will not win this time. Too many people are doing their part, as this is my part to add. My problem with a $2.2 trillion bailout for the banks is that most small businesses and individuals won't see a cent, as I am discovering from most of my artist family and the small business community. The sad truth is when we look at the numbers, it is a criminal system that pays $2 trillion in taxpayer money to stimulate the economy, while only providing $1,200 to $3,600 to those very taxpayers. There is even some more serious concern over $450 billion given in private loans to large corporations. Now let's put some finance in perspective and do some really fun numbers. So if you were getting a $1,200 check, and the number of people in America is 141 million taxpayers with no kids, the total cost of that to pay everyone out, and I mean everyone, is $169 billion. Now, if half of those taxpayers have 2 kids, so they're receiving either a $1,200 stimulus check or a $3,600 stimulus check, the total cost of that is still only $338 billion. Now, if we take that $450 billion that's kind of up in the air going to super corporations, well, 141 million registered taxpayers would all receive $3,191 each. Now, if we take, let's just say $1 trillion of that and give it to every single taxpayer, well, now we're talking about a $7,092 stimulus check. Now, if we took the entire $2.2 trillion and gave it to every single taxpayer, that would be $15,600 per taxpayer. Now, let's just talk a little redistribution of wealth and take the $1 quadrillion that is estimated is in the derivatives market and redistribute that to every man, woman, and child in America. Well, that would make all of us worth $3,039,513. If we did that to every person on the planet, so all 7 billion people got to partake in this quadrillion dollars of fake money that's been created, well, they would all be worth $142,857. Well, honestly, I would never expect the government to offer the full $2.2 trillion to the people, as that would be irresponsible. It should make you consider something important. What happened to the other $14,400 per taxpayer? Is it right to put that amount of debt on every taxpayer? The money is being stolen from the people and be given to the companies with the most lobbyists. Sadly, many of the current bailouts are based on lobbying power. And guess what? The American people are not directly paying those lobbyists. We pay corporations with our purchase votes, and those corporations pay lobbyists who lobby in favor of the corporation. Most corporate lobbyists write and submit the laws that our politicians pass. We have little to no voice in Washington, as the numbers I just stated show. I think that this is the most essential part to understand. We are being taken advantage of. Poverty is not a matter of numbers, but where those numbers are going. What if every American was a millionaire? Would the rest of the world benefit from that abundance? Think about it. It could have been possible if we had kept our riches. The lack of financial literacy has literally pulled the wool over the heads of most people. People are too afraid to discuss the topics of money as they believe it is wickedly complicated. I want you to know that they make sure things are complicated to hide the wrongs that are occurring. These devices that they have been pushing as investments may be having their final days, as I had foreseen nearly a decade ago. It is a strange time we are living in, and I can't deny the uncertainty that the future will bring. I hope that the more we educate ourselves, the less likely we are to end up in the same situation again. If we are more prepared in ourselves, in our communities, and our world as a whole, then I feel we can face any adversity with universal positivity. However, we can't keep allowing ourselves to be robbed by our leaders. The Federal Reserve, in cooperation with our government, has been stealing from the people for over a century. As I watch small businesses struggle to find loans and money to stay afloat, I realize this is far more an attack on individuals and their small businesses. Many companies have already closed, and they are already estimating 20 to 40% of companies may close by the end of the year. If we are allowing them to bail out just the large corporations, then when this is all over, that is what will be left. We are passively letting those corporations rule us, and by allowing them to put profits over the well-being of our planet, we are putting ourselves at extreme risk. Many trade agendas and carbon taxes clearly show that they want to protect profits more than the people. We must protect the people and ourselves from those who wish to do us harm. It is all being put on the table, and we have the opportunity to do something about it or allow ourselves to be ruled by criminals. What will we choose? I personally think we should throw them all in jail, but that's just my opinion. After struggling with keeping my own businesses successful for a decade, I understand the stresses it brings. It isn't easy to start and run a successful business these days. We have far more businesses struggling versus thriving, especially now. It will force us to reevaluate what is important. Many people will foreclose on properties, as I did on my house. Many people will stop paying unnecessary bills, and people will allow their credit scores to tank. I will let you know I did all of this too. I defaulted on many bills during my times of struggle a decade ago. It didn't ruin my life, and it didn't cause the banks to come after me, although the phone calls were a bit annoying. That lasted until a debt management company I formerly worked with also helped me settle my debts. I was able to survive. I was able to make it through the hard times, and eventually I was able to rebuild a credit score, although I don't use it except for emergencies. I find I save more money by saving up and paying off my purchases, as we all used to do before credit cards. Now I don't have excessive bills, and managing my expenses is not a monumental task, as I have simplified my life dramatically. There was little need for my excesses, and it took going through hardship to realize what was excessive and what was important to me. I think this process will be different for everyone, and it will be up to you to decide what is essential to you. We live in an upside-down world that I believe may have just been turned right side up, but seeing the potential depends on your perspective. Thank you for listening. Please like or share this video so that others may benefit from the information contained. Have a great day.